Okay, we'll kick off with a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, no mai haere mai, ko Joy Keane toko ingoa. Hello and welcome. My name is Joy Keane. I'm the Executive Director at the New Zealand Game Developers Association. And I'm really excited to hear from the team at New Zealand On Air today. This is going to be really cool. So just a few notes, please make sure your microphone's off. We will be doing a wee Q&A session at the end, and so the team will help facilitate that. Please be aware that we are recording this, so if you don't want your face in a video, your voice, please refrain. You can also use the chat function for the Q&A a little bit later. So now I'm going to hand you over to Amy Mills, who's going to introduce the team and kick things off. Amy.
Kia ora Joy. Tēnā rā tātou katoa, ko Amy Mills taku ingoa. Ko ahau te tumuaki o ngā tāke pūtea ki Irarangi te motu. Welcome everyone. My name's Amy Mills and I'm the Head of Funding at New Zealand On Air. Just a very quick thank you up top to Joy and Cal, because we deeply appreciate getting to kind of join the NZGDA whare and use it as an opportunity to speak to the wider sector. So big thank you to you and thank you to everyone, because we are conscious of how precious time is, and so we want this session to be as useful as possible for everyone and give you some really good updates. Joy mentioned we'll do questions at the end, and we will, but equally if people want to put their hands up or drop pārtai in the chat, I think Suzanne, who we'll introduce shortly, is going to kindly facilitate. So if there are burning questions as we go through, we're very happy to be interrupted to jump into those or equally cover them off at the end. And if we could move to the next slide, Joy. So this is the guts of what we wanted to cover off today, and I'll just do a brief intro bit up top. So I'll reintroduce the team. For anyone who attended the webinar last time, you'll have seen us all, but there might be people joining us fresh, and so we want to do a brief round the team so you can put names to faces and get a sense of who does what. We'll also do, it's been a couple of months since we last spoke to you, so we want to do a really good recap of where we're at with the game development sector rebate, GDSR, not assuming that anyone knows anything, so kind of step through that. But really the meat of it will be trying to ensure you've got a really clear sense of what are next steps, what are some of the key things that are the stages that are happening upcoming, including things like the Statement of Readiness. We'll explain and talk to that, final application, where that's at and what that's looking like, and then how we'll do our reviewing and assessing. I also wanted to speak a little bit, because we're now through the other side of the pilot phase, and there's some great learnings we got from that, so we wanted to take the opportunity to share those. And we'll do a little bit of an overview of things that we talked about last time, but just kind of reiterating. I think, it's a very high trust rebate scheme, so wanting to talk about oversight and auditing, so everybody's kind of clear on that. Some updates to accreditation, and then we'll basically just give you another kind of, here are the key dates, so hopefully everybody walks away crystal clear on what the next steps are. And as I said, we'll hopefully have lots of questions at the end, as well as throughout. So if you flick to the next slide, Joy, it's our team. So I will just throw to each of us individually, and if we could briefly just speak to our role, but of most use, I think, to everybody on the webinar will be to sort of understand what areas people are working on specifically, so you can get a sense of who does what and who might be a good direct point of content for what aspects. Contact. So I'll start with you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Amy. Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Suzanne toko ingoa, ko ahau te tohu whakatiti kōrero mā tāmua ki Irarangi te motu. So I'm the Senior Comms Advisor at New Zealand On Air, which essentially means I'm the one who puts together a lot of the communications, such as the newsletters, media releases, that sort of thing, that go out to the sector about GDSR, including just putting some of that information up on the website so that it's there for potential applicants, and working very closely with the NZGDA team, of course, to make sure that the sector's kept up to speed on the rebate and how to access it. Thanks, Amy.
Suzanne. And I think, Christina, you might be shuffled alongside Chantel, so you can introduce yourself.
Hello, I can't see myself, so can you see me now?
We can.
Okay. Kia ora, I'm Christina. I'm the Corporate Services Coordinator at NZ On Air. And yeah, involved in the games team. I do kind of admin-y stuff. I man the inbox. If you ever call, I'll probably be the one who answers the phone. And yeah, other behind the scenes sort of things. Yeah, I will pass on to Luke.
Koutou, ko Luke tōku ingoa, he kai whina kai ko te hau no te irarangi te motu. So I'm the Assistant Accountant at New Zealand On Air. Very exciting, I know. I am the guy that deals with the finances and numbers. And so I'll be the point of contact for any question about eligible expenditure and the assessment process in general. So yeah, and I'll pass it to Connell.
You're muted, Connell.
Sorry, that was my bad.
I know, that's all right. We were just talking about how we kind of have a rotating
Conveyor belt
going on over here. Kia ora koutou, ko Connell Laird tōku ingoa, he kai tohu kirimana Pākehā ahau no irarangi te motu. Hi everyone, my name's Connell Laird. I'm the Business Affairs Advisor here at New Zealand On Air. Lead a lot of our contracting outside of the game space and kind of, I guess, sit adjacent to the core games team and kind of just been helping out with a lot of the documentation surrounding the rebate scheme, really. So yeah, lovely to meet you all, despite not being able to see many of you. And I'll just pass over to our Head of Corporate Services, Sharon Carey.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sharon Carey toko ingoa, he te Ratonga Rangatopu. I'm Head of Corporate Services at New Zealand On Air. My main function in this is auditing and coordinating that program. So any questions about that, please let me know. Lovely to meet you all.
Thanks, Sharon. And actually, we couldn't have Wei Ping on the call with us today because she's travelling overseas at the moment, but she and Sharon and Luke all work incredibly closely together. So those of you who went through the pilot phase will probably have had contact with Luke and or Wei Ping in that process. And I want to hand across and introduce, and she needs zero introduction to this group in particular, but just to say that we were incredibly thrilled when Chantal agreed to take up the position. And I feel funny talking about you because I can see you, but you just blew us away in the interview process. And I think what we realised was the opportunity you bring to the GDSR in terms of what it can offer the sector and its growth and scale. So, you know, during the interview process, the vision that Chantal had and could see the opportunities beyond just it being a straight economic rebate scheme, it's actually about what it might mean for kind of equity and representation across the sector and the growth of it. And it's just been a real privilege. You know, you've only been here for all of, I think, a month, but tomorrow I think is your month anniversary. But just having watched the kind of methodology you've approached the work, and Chantal spent a ton of time sitting with all our design documents and how do we get to here, and then taking that and starting to speak to the sector directly about learnings and seeing what could happen there. So, and before I hand across to you, obviously, to kick into sort of the next steps, it was also just to mention that we last year, which Chantal will talk to briefly in the next slide, but we had delays in terms of our process. So we actually had to pause some of the further recruiting around some of the other skills that we want to bring into the team that we're still looking for. In a funny way, while that was hard to have to sort of hit pause, it's actually possibly a bit of a blessing in disguise, because now that Chantal's joined, the ability that she's got to actually kind of see what skills to bring in and what might be required. So it's just a note really to say to the sector, there'll probably be some new faces joining at some point in the near future, but we're just kind of working through what that looks like. But yes, I shall hand across to you now, Chantal.
Thank you so much, Amy. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the GDSR to date. So following many years of incredible advocacy work from the game development community, you guys, New Zealand On Air was entrusted with administering the brand new game development sector rebate. The primary objective is to help us cultivate sustained growth and advancement within Aotearoa New Zealand's game development sector. So during the registration period from October to November last year, studios with an annual eligible expenditure exceeding 250,000 were invited to join the initiative. The response was really remarkable. We've had over 51 studios enrolled. A pilot phase was then initiated, engaging a select group of studios with the highest annual expenditures, and this phase, spanning a 6-month window of eligible costs, aimed to evaluate our new processes and gather valuable feedback. December then marked, as Amy mentioned, a brief pause, but the enthusiasm for the GDSR initiative was reaffirmed by the new government. Recognising game development's significance, they underscored their commitment to its positive impact. So with the green light, we then proceeded to assess applications to determine if studios met the requirements for the final phase, which kicks off in April. So now let's take a look at an overview of the entire process. So here you'll see the steps studios need to undertake in order for them to be considered for the rebate, and also during that final application round. If you need it, a copy of this graphic can be found on our website as well. Next, we're going to dive into what's coming up. If we can go to the next slide, Joy, that would be amazing. It's always funny when you're not controlling your own slides, so thank you so much for doing that for us. So in this next section, we're going to cover the Statement of Readiness, the final application, and review and assessment from NZ On Air. So let's have a look at the Statement of Readiness. First, this form is designed to be very straightforward. It should only require about 10 to 15 minutes of your time to complete. It doesn't require any additional documentation. The purpose is to equip you all with a clear idea of the resources you'll need to prepare for your final GDSR application. And additionally, it allows New Zealand On Air to identify studios that may need a bit more additional support around that time due to potentially being smaller and having limited resources. This isn't a pass or fail kind of step, but it is required in order for you to advance to the final application stage, and it is due at the end of this week. So make sure to book in 10 to 15 minutes to get that done and sent in. Next, we have the final application process. So this is something that we're still refining at the moment after gathering more and more feedback from the pilot phase. I'll be doing a bit more of that over the next couple of weeks as well. So the idea is that it will go live on April 1st. Our intention is to hopefully share the form a week or two in advance of April 1st so that you can have a look at what's required and familiarize yourself with any resources that you might need to get lined up. And then it will close a month later at the end of April. Now I'm going to hand over to one of our wonderful accountants, Luke, to share some insights into our assessment and review phases here at New Zealand On Air.
Chantal. Okay, so let's start with what is the assessment and what we're trying to achieve here. So the idea is that we need to understand the applicant, your expenses, so that we can determine how this fits with the GDSR eligibility guidelines. And there are areas that we need to understand, such as company structure and what projects are deemed eligible and any other sources of funding. But these are slightly more straightforward than the actual financial expenditure. So what do we need to do this? We'll need your financial information, which can be made up with financial statements and or management accounts for the period that we're asking about. So obviously there is quite a tight turnaround for the end of the GDSR period to the end of the financial year. So we don't expect everyone to have all of their financial statements ready to go by that. So that's why we're saying anything that has management accounts with actuals to date is fine. But it's not as simple as just handing in your financials. There needs to be a little bit of data input and manipulation to determine the eligible costs. So what we're asking for is a bit of a workbook of sorts. And why does there need to be a workbook? Well, because we need to see what amount of your expenditure for the year is eligible under the GDSR. So to start, there are guidelines on the New Zealand On Air website that break down eligibility for the GDSR. and I encourage everyone to check that out. Please keep in mind that first section of those guidelines is in the context of remuneration, which basically means that first section applies to employees and the work that your employees do. So yeah, again, everyone will need to see this document. It's on our website under GDSR financial information required and eligible expenditure. So rather than go through in detail every eligible cost here, I thought instead it would be easy to say the main sections that you need to consider. This is your general expenses for game development, such as subscriptions, traveling, hosting services, etc. And another one is your employee and contractor inspection expenses. And by this we mean salaries and wages, etc., not the expense claims for the employees. And the final is depreciation for game production software and hardware. For eligible expenditure, there's an emphasis on core game development activities and staff. So the best way to explain this is probably to go through what costs are not eligible. And these are things like expenditure on general business overheads, such as administration, insurance, HR costs, legal costs, general auditing costs, and things like rent and land premise rent. Also, any employees or contractors who are not domiciled in New Zealand, which means that they're not, based in New Zealand, that's a big thing. And costs for which another business has already claimed under the GDSR. And the other big one is just other depreciation costs. So we've specifically said depreciation costs for game production software and hardware. Now, with all that being said, we understand there may be certain costs that on the surface appear to be administrative, but may be fundamental in your game development process. And these items may be used differently, by you as game developers than it may be in other industries. The common area we found in the pilot phase for this was, certain software or service subscriptions. So if this is the case and you believe that your subscription to the service or software is fundamental, then please provide any justification you can as to why you believe it should be. And this information will not only help us in the assessment, but it also allows us to provide MB with more information on how things may differ in the game development industry as it does in other industries. So obviously that's a lot to take on and remember, and how we're going to remember all of that. The good news is that we have an example worksheet of what we might expect to see in the GDSR final application. Obviously it will be different for everybody, so there is no one size fits all. It's not exactly a template, it's more of an example of what we would expect to see, and it highlights the key information we need to complete the assessment. And the final point here is that we may also just follow up with applicants to address any questions or anything that we find that we just want a little bit more clarification on. The example worksheet that we'll be calling it is going to be available with the Statement of Readiness. So if you haven't seen that yet, it should be going up very soon. And yeah, I think that's all from me for now. So I'll hand back to Chantal.
And I will hand straight to Amy.
Thank you. Thanks, Luke. So this area, which I mentioned up top, it's one that's really led by Hui Ping and Sharon most closely on our side, but it was just worth touching on because I think some of the other rebate schemes that operate internationally around the world, the structure of them I think can allow for each single kind of application to be fully audited before it's submitted in for, dispensation and payout. But because of the time frame and structure of our schemes, certainly in the first couple of years, we're having to take a more pragmatic approach to how we do this, given the very truncated time frames that Luke mentioned previously. So it was really to let the sector know that we're going to be doing spot audits as a kind of primary way, sort of randomized audits to sort of ensure a level of rigor across applications that are submitted in the first year. But I think we'd be interested in looking in future years whether or not there's a way that the structure of the GDSR might change to allow for a time frame that would allow the applicants to have their final applications audited prior to submission into the scheme. And those of you who've been looking through the fine print would have noted that it is actually included as part of the eligible expenditure. So it's sort of future-proofing it for future years. And as with the slide outlines as well, we've got the right to audit applications specifically as required. And I think we mentioned this in the last webinar, but that statement of readiness process that Chantal talked through, that's a useful kind of mechanism or filter for us that I think will help unearth if we think there are any applications that may be edge case, or we might want to put an additional lens of rigor across, and that might help kind of prioritize how we then go on to select those that might go on for spot auditing. So it is a really important process just to make sure we feel we've got a really good handle on the kind of monitoring and oversight of the scheme. And then if you flick to the next slide, Joy, so the learnings from the pilot phase. So this was, as a brief recap for those that might not be aware of it, the pilot phase actually wasn't part of the original design of the GDSR. It was something I think the sector did advocate for, and the previous government was very supportive of, which was to try and ensure there might be some way of getting funding out to the sector prior to Christmas. And of course, we hadn't set up the scheme in full yet. So while it was a bit of a wrangle to get there, I think the pilot phase offered us an incredible opportunity to prototype how the fund would work. So the pilot phase was only open to a select number of organisations, games companies who met a certain threshold of revenue generation, and it was quite a high threshold. So the number that ended up being eligible to come into the pilot phase for what ended up being a 6-month period of eligible expenditure up till 30 September, there was only 9 in the end that met that threshold. So it ended up being a really kind of compact number that helped us hone the whole process that we went through. And you know, just from all of us, just an enormous thank you to those 9 applicants, because it was an invaluable process of learning, and at every stage of the pipeline, you know, from how the application form functioned, the ticks that we know exist in the submissions portal that we're trying to work on, through to quality of the data and information, through to assessment. It was just, yeah, it really did. It was an enormously useful exercise for us to go through. And the second point in terms of learnings, which is something we'll carry through to the final application process, is just how critical the communication was. And Luke alluded to this, but just the level of back and forth we could have with those pilot phase applicants leading up to submission, queries around eligible expenditure, greater context that was required from our side or from NB's side back to applicants. Like it was really hugely informative. And so that's actually led to, and it's been wonderful because Chantal has then gone and done a great job of going out to have more direct conversations with the pilot applicants once we're through the process to say, how did you find it? Where were the challenges? What could be improved? So all of that is flowing into the final application stage. So hopefully everyone else can kind of benefit from those. And I think one of the biggest learnings for us is that third bullet point, clarification on eligible expenditure. And this also applies to eligible criteria. So as you'll be aware, the design features document that NB that passed through Cabinet, that NB published, that has flowed through into the guidelines and all the other documentation we've put out publicly, is a really strong piece of work, and it was informed hugely by the sector's input. And it is fixed because it went through Cabinet approval. So there aren't changes to those criteria and definitions, but what we think we can do that will be very useful, having gone through the pilot phase, is hopefully add another layer of context and detail against those definitions, against the criteria, against the eligible expenditure, that sort of gives greater context and guidance to applicants about what is and isn't included and why. So that's the piece of work that's kind of front of mind for Chantal and the team at the moment, and working alongside NB. So we really want to very soon release that kind of additional context and detail that will go up, that will help applicants when they're pulling together their final application. So again, just having had the opportunity of unearthing that through the pilot phase has been fantastic. Another learning that won't be a surprise to anyone, things take longer than you think, our side and on the applicant side. So just being very aware of that. And again, we're trying to pull the learnings in to have the final application form ready, and we want to try and put that up as early as we can, even before the deadline for submission. Once it's out there and up, we'll broadcast it really loudly so that everybody could dive in and just spend a lot of time looking at what's going to be required and asking questions as needed. And then just that last point around the year 2 review of the GDSR. So this goes back to that piece around kind of clarification on what's included, what's excluded, and why. I think that has unearthed some big conversations about aspects of things that maybe could be included, and why, and the rationale. And as I mentioned, it's a really, like, there's a rigor and a process to things going through cabinet, so there can't be changes made in the first year. But certainly we're very conscious, and we feel like this, all of you have been really generous with your feedback as well, that I think there'll be a lot of information we're keen to gather as you go through the final application stage that might lead us to those conversations with NB around what changes might we want to make to the GDSR in year 2, and how do we build up an evidence base or kind of a rationale for what those changes might look like. So again, that was just another learning we took from the pilot phase that we could see will probably happen again at the final application stage. And that was the learning. So I will hand back to Suzanne. She's going to talk about accreditation.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So accreditation, this is something we did talk about in the previous webinar, and we've been finalising it further since in terms of details, and it's been great to have Chantel on board to look at it from the sector's point of view as well and give some advice there. So once the final application made by a registered business for the rebate is successful, there will be a requirement to acknowledge the support of the GDSR through New Zealand On Air. Reason for this is that consistent and prominent accreditation is essentially going to help us reinforce as widely as possible the existence of the GDSR in the first place and the value of the rebate to Aotearoa. Also, given we're a distributor of public funds, it's about transparency, which is really key for us as a government agency. And obviously, most crucially, also helps to raise awareness of the rebate overseas, as that, of course, will attract further investment into New Zealand studios. So where are we at? We've been putting together a set of accreditation guidelines, and that we will have out to the sector very soon. And we're also in the process of developing logos. This is both a static logo in the colour, the orange, as well as a black and also a white logo asset pack. Plus, we're currently designing an animated colour logo, which you can use as well, potentially in the same sort of vein as the animated New Zealand On Air logo you may well have seen on a lot of screen content. In terms of where the logo should be displayed, we see this as accrediting the supported scheme within your business's website and within your game website, and where possible, accreditation in your game credits. Our preference, of course, is for you to aim to include accreditation in each of those, unless there's a reason that you're unable to do so. Just to add to that, though, we do understand that in terms of accreditation in your game credits, there is some effort involved in updating credits for live games, especially across platforms. So we do understand that this process may require some time and is perhaps best aligned with scheduled updates. So we're happy for you to add the logo into appropriate game credits in your next update or within 6 months. If you'd like to, you can also use the animated or static logo in game splash or loading screens. However, Chantel tells me that some platform partnerships may not allow this. We're also aware that the GDSR may be used for unreleased games. So in those instances, we do recognise that accreditation will, perhaps initially, need to be limited to purely inclusion on business and game websites, with a view to perhaps adding it into credits or loading screens if that's applicable at a later date. The logo themselves, I can't show you just now, but it is the orange New Zealand On Air logo that you would have seen earlier in our slide deck and see often in our communications out to you. Again, it's going to be either a static or an animated logo. And the static logo will incorporate wording along the lines of supported by the New Zealand game development sector rebate, because again, it's another opportunity to reinforce the GDSR to audiences in New Zealand, but also internationally. Ultimately, as I say, we're still working through the finer details of what's reasonable and feasible. So we certainly encourage you to come and talk to us if you want to discuss the options that would work best for you. And as we may have mentioned previously, also open to creative ideas. So if you have ways you think you could achieve the accreditation, do feel free to get in touch. And absolutely, we're always open to feedback. It's really key that we work together to ensure we do this in a way, as I say, that recognises what's feasible and reasonable, but also what will help promote to the wider sector this rebate is here and that it's available. So that's about it for me on accreditation. I think over to you, Chantal, for what's next, I believe.
Thank you so much for all of that super useful information, and we'll be very excited to share the logo with you guys once it's completed its design. Okay, so what's next? A few dates coming up. So the Statement of Readiness, as mentioned earlier, is due this Friday. Then feedback will be analysed to inform the final application form. As a note, I've been focusing on feedback from the South Island the last couple of weeks, and then the next couple of weeks will focus on the North Island. So you guys don't freak out that I haven't contacted you yet, it will happen. Final stage applications will open on April 1st and close on April 30th. Alrighty, so now we move to the last part of our time together, which is question time. On screen, you'll also see links to our website, our email address, and if you sign up to our newsletter there, you'll be able to get regular updates from the lovely Suzanne of what we are up to. So I will hand over to, I believe, Suzanne to run the Q&A. And what we might do, Joy, is close the presentation screen so that way we can see everyone's faces at full size or just their names in giant writing. All right. Thanks so much. Over to you, Suzanne.
Yes, thank you. Well, I've been flicking through during the course of the presentation and see if anyone's put their hand up. Can't see anything here. Can't see anything in the chat, but if you'd like to put your hand up, please do so. Otherwise, obviously, we've been incredibly insightful. Anyone? No, I think, perhaps, is there anything else we need to add, Chantal, that we might have missed or expand on?
Just essentially, if you want to reach out to discuss things in detail, we're always available. So email that rebates@nzonair.govt.nz address and we'll get through to you. We're still building the size of our team here, as mentioned earlier, so it might take us a little bit longer to get back to some inquiries at the moment than we would like, but we are increasing the speed on those times. But that feedback's incredibly important. It will help us to shape the rebate over the coming years. So it's definitely something that we really value and appreciate from all of you.
Okay, so we do have a question that's just popped in. What can a studio do if they haven't yet registered but now qualify for the GDSR? Can they apply late? Perhaps that's Chantal or Amy on that one.
Yeah, I can jump in with this. This is the discussion we have been having because actually internally at New Zealand On Air, we do have quite a lot of processes that we've gone through with all of the studios to get to here. If somehow you've stayed out of the kind of information loop of the fact that the GDSR process started back in November last year, feel free to send me or Christina, who's next to me, an email and we can have a call and discuss what might be possible.
Great. Any other questions? I'll just add to what you were saying before, Chantal, in that obviously our web page is a great source of information and we try and keep that as updated as possible and certainly make sure those documents have updates as much as we can. The other thing is our newsletter. Obviously, NZGDA does a wonderful job of keeping you informed and passing on our communications, but also jumping onto that newsletter link is terrific. You can access that on our website as well, so that anything we've got to update you on, you'll get directly, and no harm in having it coming from 2 directions to make sure you get everything updated and on time.
Additionally, something we would really love to do in the future is start to celebrate the incredible work that you're doing with support of the GDSR. So do let us know if you have any exciting news, and we will look to include that in our newsletter over the coming months as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there are no more hands up, we might look to wrap here. And feel free to contact us if you do have any questions. Again, I'll be reaching out to some of the North Island studios over the next couple of weeks to gather more feedback and insight and feed that into the team here. I can just see a message. Oh, that's a thank you. That's okay. We're really happy to host you guys today. So we will say farewell, see you later, and we will talk to you again soon. Bye.
Thanks all. Ka kite.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. Take care.